miles to Chicago. We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes. It's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
Good evening, everybody. Mark Klein hanging out with you. Welcome to another Long Island Blues Warehouse. I'll tell you what, week after week, we like to bring you Long Island's finest. We've had some great bands in here in the past. We continue to do the same today, if I could spit that out. Marbles in my mouth, please forgive me. This week in the studio, we've got a band, veteran musicians, Long Island veteran players. These guys have been playing on Long Island, I'm going to have to say 35, 40 years plus. I don't want to date them too heavily, but they've been around, these guys. These guys have been doing their thing strong for a few decades now. Let's just word it that way, I think, is the way to go. You agree with me, Bobby?
I do.
I think that's the way to word that. Let's see. The lead man, he's done his own solo projects over the years, right to the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. His latest project on the studio with us right now, the Clapton Chronicles. Oh, yeah. This week's featured artist, the Clapton Chronicles. George CINTRON, lead guitar and vocals. How you doing, George?
Doing excellent.
Good to see
Thank you very much.
Good to see you again, my man.
Thanks for having us.
We had you in here in the world-renowned EKO studios a few years ago doing another project of yours way back when.
Oh, yes, yes.
I'll tell you what, man. You've again. I'm sorry the way we introed this thing earlier with the age thing. Decades, man. I mean, we're talking about
40.
What,
40.
the 70s.
Yeah, but the late 70s.
Good point. All right, I stand corrected. The late 70s.
There's a big difference between 1971 and 1979.
All right, I wasn't born yet. You guys were doing your thing.
Yeah, we were playing clubs. I know. That's true.
I think I was in diapers then, actually, truth be told. Maybe a few years older.
Don't make us fact check.
Let's one thing I always like to do on this show is talk about some history, my man. Let's talk about when you began musically, George. Let's start with when you picked up a guitar. How old were you? What was the influence? What made you decide this was a direction you were going to head into in life?
Well, I had a guitar always. My grandfather played the guitar, so
Okay.
since birth, I think. But you know, like everybody else my age, the Beatles, you know, on TV, and
Ed Sullivan.
then Eric Clapton, my first hero. Truth be told, no lie.
From Beatles to Clapton?
All the music in between, because I was a pop radio kid, so it could have been anything. I listened to everything.
Yardbirds. I'm gonna
No,
guess.
I mean everything. Everything that was on Top 40 radio to me was all the same.
Okay.
Because I didn't know. I was like, well, it's on the radio. So.
Well, there were two types of music back then, as there are today, as we both, I'm sure, will agree. There's everything else, and there's blues.
Well, that's of course true.
And you were listening to both types of music back then.
Yes. Anything that was on the radio, yeah, I was listening to it.
So you were getting lessons from your grandfather?
No. In the very beginning, yeah. But he didn't know much about pop music or American music for that matter. So, but he taught me how to play the guitar.
Okay.
And he gave me a guitar.
Now, how old were you when you started actually getting out and performing to publics? Do you remember how old? You remember what age?
I was in the 11th grade, so
About 16, 17.
Yeah.
No kidding.
about then.
You getting into clubs underage?
Oh, no, we didn't play clubs. We played, you know, the schools and dances and
Battle of
stuff
the
like
Bands
that.
type things?
The clubs was a little bit later.
Okay.
Right after high school.
Right out of high
Steve and I and Ricky, we played the clubs.
Let's talk about that first band of yours called Tattoo. Was that your first band?
The first one that played the clubs was actually Teaser, right? Yeah,
Say it
was
again?
Teaser. We had
You were in a band called Teaser.
The three of us had a band called Teaser before Tattoo.
You got guys on the stage with you tonight that you started with.
That we've known each other since high school. Yeah.
No kidding.
Decades.
Decades.
40 years.
Well put, Bobby Simmons. Well put.
You're the new guy.
The politically correct way of wording that.
Yes, it's true.
So, out of high school, now when you hit the club scene, what type of music were you playing back then? It was more of a rock thing for you back in
Well,
those
it was,
days, correct?
totally a rock thing. It was no heavy metal at that time, but it was, you know, Van Halen. And
The classic rock stuff, which
Yeah.
back in those days was just rock.
was just rock, right? You could play the Cars, or you could play the Scorpions, or you could play anything. And, you know, it was probably all kind of accepted. Zeppelin.
For those viewing this program that are familiar with the Long Island, New York area, you had clubs like Hammerheads,
Yes.
Cheers, Chaucer's Ale House we mentioned, Cariola's old club, Sundance,
Yeah, the Mad Hatter.
the Mad Hatter.
Yeah,
Was
there's
that
a lot
Stony
of-
Brook?
They had two, Stony Brook and out in the Hamptons.
February, some of these rock clubs that don't exist here on Long Island anymore.
Actually, none of them do. It's a shame. None of those clubs that we used to play are still there.
You know, come to think of it, I think there's one club that still exists on Long Island today from like the early 80s. It wasn't a live music venue. I think it's a place called Zachary's in East Meadow.
Is that right?
I think
Yeah.
that's the only club that's still around today
It could very well be.
from that late 70s, early 80s era.
That could be. I always say that, like the guys in LA, if you played the, you know, the whiskey, like say when we started with Tattoo, you could still go to the whiskey today and sit at the bar and have a beer.
No kidding.
And we would all, I mean, I know I would. I would go to Cheers once in a while and sit at the bar. I don't even drink anymore, and I'd go. Because it'd be nice to see it, you know, to see something. But
That was a great live
not there.
music venue.
yeah,
That
there was
great-
a million of them. There was a lot of them.
There were a lot of them on Long Island that unfortunately don't exist anymore. The live club scene dropped like flies over over the years, and it's a shame, man. The talent on Long Island, I don't have to tell you, amazing. A lot of these players we were fortunate to have on Long Island.
Oh yeah, back then. I mean, even now, there's great musicians. It's just you have to find a new way to play, a new way to play, a new place to play. You know, you adapt
To try and stay current.
and to be a musician.
Yeah.
You know, 'cause-
I know a lot of blues players today that play in wedding bands because it pays the bills.
Oh, absolutely.
But they're bored out of their minds.
Yeah. Well,
You know, and then they'll do their passion for 60 or $100 on the weekend.
yeah.
On a Saturday night or a Tuesday or a Wednesday night for that matter.
And for them, it's worth it. You know, it's worth the trade-off. You still get to play. You still hone your craft in some way, but, you know, and then when the opportunity comes, you're ready. Because there's nothing worse than not being ready. If you get a gig and you haven't played in 5 years, then, you know, you're not going to be ready. It's not
I
going to
can
be
appreciate that, George. I can
So-
definitely appreciate that. We got a lot to do in a short period of time. I said we jump into another one. We'll come back and talk more later with you and some of these fine players. What are we doing next?
It's in the way.
You good to go? Once again on the Blues Warehouse, this week's featured artist, the Clapton Chronicles.
It's in the way that you use it. It comes and it goes. It's in the way that you use it. But don't you know? And if you lie, you will lose it. Feelings will show. So don't you ever abuse it. Don't let it go. Nobody right till somebody's wrong. Nobody weak till somebody's strong. No one gets lucky till luck comes along. No one is lonely till somebody's gone. It's in the way that you use it. Comes and it goes. It's in the way that you use it. But don't you know?
Hi, this is Rose from Babylon, New York, and you're listening to the Long Island Blues Warehouse.
Crossroads,
Oh, yeah. This week's featured artist, the Clapton Chronicles. George CINTRON, frontman, guitar, and vocals. Nicely done as always, George.
Thank you very much.
George, let's jump into the 90s for a minute with you.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about some of the things you had going on. Were you traveling around the country? Were you still on Long Island doing your thing?
The early 90s, yeah, still on Long Island. In 97, I started working for Enrique Iglesias.
Enrique Iglesias. That was late 90s.
Yes.
Let's jump to that in a second. Let's go back to the early 90s. You were doing your own your own solo thing?
Yeah, the clubs had kind of dried up, as it were. So, yeah, playing small clubs. I was in a group called the Stiff Richards Group. Then we would play everywhere, you know. That started the sort of a freelance time, too, because you took gigs, people called, and you just went and played.
How'd you hook up with Iglesias?
I know Tommy Burns, the guitar player for Billy Joel.
Billy Joel, sure.
He was Enrique's MD, musical director, and he was putting a band together. So he asked me if I knew Spanish.
And the answer was what?
Yes, that was my first language. So that was my audition.
That you could speak Spanish?
That I could speak Spanish.
And then after you passed that part of the audition, then you played for him later?
I didn't have to. They said, you speak Spanish? I said, yeah.
You're in.
Because no one else in the group spoke Spanish.
No kidding.
And he only sang in Spanish at that time.
Really?
So that was it. 2 weeks later, I was in Miami.
How long did you have a run with him?
3 years.
Okay.
2 world tours.
Europe, I'm guessing.
Everywhere they spoke Spanish. So Spain, a little bit in Portugal, all of Central and South America.
No English-speaking parts of the world?
Well, no, you'd be surprised. Like America, we played Chicago. First tour, Chicago.
Okay.
You know, Houston, like places you might not imagine. Minneapolis.
I was getting ready to get on the phone and make a few phone calls.
Yeah, no. We played everywhere. We played everywhere and then after that, we played everywhere. So.
What'd you do after that?
That would take us to.
That was 97. We're talking about.
That would take us to 2000.
2000. You had an interesting project you got involved in.
In the Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
The Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Yes.
How'd you hook up with that group?
They called Al Petrelli.
Al Petrelli.
He was doing Megadeth at that time, and he couldn't do the TSO tour. He did the records.
Okay.
So they called and asked
He did the studio stuff.
He did the studio record, and because he was a Megadeth that year, he couldn't tour with TSO.
He had a conflict going on.
Right.
So you got the call.
And I went in and auditioned, and I got it.
Did you speak English or Spanish?
Mainly Spanish at that time. I was on a roll. No, yeah. But yeah.
You almost sounded sincere with that.
I was trying. So then, then I got the gig, and we did the one tour, 2000. And then by 2001, Al was not a Megadeth anymore, so he took his gig back.
Okay. And then you went back to do your own thing.
Yes.
Which you still do today.
Yes.
As well as what we're doing tonight.
Yeah, all kinds of things nowadays. You freelance a lot, as Bobby will tell you.
Bobby's got some things to say, too. We're going to get to you in a little bit, I think.
Yeah. Right.
We're going to get to all these fine players on the stage. I say we jump into another song. We'll come back and talk to the rhythm section and the man on the keys. What are we doing next, George?
I believe it's Bell Bottom Blues.
Oh, love it. You good to go?
Yep.
Once again on the Long Island Blues Warehouse, we are going to keep things moving with this week's featured artist, the Clapton Chronicles.
1, 2, 3. Bell-bottom blues, you make me cry. I don't want to lose this feeling. And if we're gonna meet again. And if we do, don't you be surprised if you find me with another lover. Oh, do you wanna see me crawl across the floor to you? Do you wanna hear me begging to take you back? Gladly do it, 'cause I don't wanna fade away. Give me one more day, please. I don't wanna fade away. Anyhow, I wanna stay. I don't wanna fade away. Give me one more day, please. I don't wanna fade away. Anyhow, I wanna stay.
Oh, yeah. This week's featured artist, the Clapton Chronicles. Nicely done, George CINTRON, as always. Thank you. George, you, not too long ago, I believe you were out in Vegas doing you were part of a Queen show?
I did We Will Rock You, the Queen play.
Sure.
They have a play in London that's been running for several years now. All their music and a story attached to it. And they mounted a version in Las Vegas. So I did that for 5 months.
Very cool, man. Very
Awesome.
cool.
Used Brian May's amps and stuff. It was terrific.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Very cool. Nicely done. Nicely done as always. George CINTRON, guitar and vocals. Let's head over to Bobby Simmons on the keys, if we can, for a moment. How you doing, Bobby?
I'm doing pretty good, Mark. How are you?
First thing I want to discuss with you is, did you lose some weight?
Yes, I did.
Man, your face looks thin.
I did.
What have you been doing?
Well, it's winter. I usually graze during the summer, and everything's all dried up.
We pulled you out of hibernation for this tonight.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, that worked out well. Well-known keyboardist here on Long Island for decades as well, I'd have to say.
Here we go.
You've been working with a band we had in here some months back. Many people around this part of the world are familiar with the Stanton Anderson Band.
That is correct. Twice maybe we were here, I think.
I think we did an audio thing
is
some
that what
5 or 6 years ago, and then we had you boys back about a year ago to do the video, one of the webisodes we're shooting. And another great contributor to music on Long Island, man. Let's talk about some history with you. Let's talk about when you began.
I began with, like a lot of keyboard players, with piano lessons. Couldn't go out after dinner until you practice, stuff like that.
Classical in the beginning for you?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That's all I knew. And my paper boy was a drummer in a band. His keyboard player, they were losing. So he used to hear me practice when he would come deliver the paper. And he said to my mother, "Can we have your son?" And it's changed everything.
Did he say it in English or in Spanish?
No, it was all English.
All right, just checking.
Yeah. I think it was English. So that was the start. So I joined his band, which actually was him, his twin brother, and his older brother. And it was a band called the Square Pegs.
What age are we talking about for you?
We're talking like 15 for me, so it's decades, Mark.
Give or take a few months.
Yeah, give or take a few.
All right.
The funny thing is, I'm getting back together with them on Sunday. We get together like once a year. We still get together, play the old songs.
Little reunion thing, huh?
It's hysterical. It's hysterical. All the old stuff.
Very cool, man.
Yeah.
Very cool. It's nice to be friends with those guys all these years, huh?
Yes,
and
it
still
is.
be able to do. You don't hear about that very often. In these parts.
No.
You know, George with these fellas, and Bobby with his old guys. Who else has that kind of story to tell?
Well, George is kind of stuck with them because they all live here. All my buddies are all spread out. I have to go down to Tampa to get together with them.
All right.
So I have it easier than George.
When did you hook up with the infamous Stanton Anderson boys and girls?
I guess it was the end of the 70s, 79.
You've been with
perhaps.
them since those days.
Yeah, well, we took a short break of about 20 years.
No, it wasn't that long.
Okay, it wasn't.
Maybe
It was
7,
close.
Maybe 18.
Something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't 20, man.
It
It wasn't 2 decades.
It wasn't, no, it was a decade plus.
Okay.
Just to rest up. And then we came back and better than ever, you know, it went well.
What were you doing musically when Stanton took a little hiatus?
Oh, this
You
band, that band, you know.
Just a gun for hire type of thing?
Yes, yes.
Filling in.
We
wherever
all
you-
are. We all are.
I understand that, my man. I understand that. Great contributor to the live music scene here on Long Island, my man. I always appreciate seeing you do your thing.
I'm like a bad penny.
I'm listening to the rest.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like a bad penny. I keep showing up.
You keep showing up. Always on heads, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a guess.
Just- all right.
Just a guess. Bobby Simmons on the keys. We thank you, sir.
Thank you,
It's
Mark.
always good to see you in here.
Great.
George, let's jump into another one. We'll come back and talk to the rhythm section.
Awesome.
What are we doing next?
Old tune, Before You Accuse Me.
Oh, you good to go? Am I good to go?
Are you good to go?
I am good to go. I'm going to look in this direction and say this. Long Island Blues Warehouse. We're going to keep it moving with the Clapton Chronicles. Let's do it.
Before you accuse me, take a look at yourself. Before you accuse me, take a look at yourself. Say I'm spending my money on all the women, taking money for someone else. I call your mama several nights ago. I call your mama several nights ago. Your mama said, son, don't call my daughter no more. Before you accuse me, take a look at yourself. Before you accuse me, take a look at yourself. You say I'm spending my money on other women, taking money for someone else. Yeah, think about it.
Oh, yeah. The Clapton Chronicles. Nicely done, gentlemen, as always. I want to grab on the bass, Mr. Rick PANZIKA, if he'll head on up to his mic. How you doing, Rick?
All right.
It's good to see you, my man. It's good to see you. It's a bit of a blur for me, but back in the early 80s, I'd have to say, sneaking into some bars myself back in those days. I can say that now. I think it's okay now I can say it. Places like Cheers.
Yeah.
You were in an old project called Swift Kick.
Yeah, for a few years. It was a big blur for me too.
I'm hearing a couple of gasps coming from our little in-studio audience. Like, oh my God, I remember that band. Let's talk. First of all, I got to say, looking at this bass, can we get a close-up of that? Move your hand for a second. Looking at that bass, you don't play this thing. You like spar with it. First of all.
Well, it's a 71. I've had it since about 74, 75, and
No kidding.
it was in good shape. It's
What I want to know
decades
is,
old.
why did you take a knife to the top of it and scrape the hell out of
That
it?
wasn't a knife. That was me.
Just blood, sweat, and tears, huh?
Jewelry, beer mugs, bottles, whatever.
So obviously you were playing this thing since those
Yeah.
Cheers days and before.
I've been trying to replace it over the years, trying to get another one. I can't get one that feels like this.
Yeah, one thing I'm digging about it, the way the neck at the top thins out. Is that a jazz bass?
Yeah, it's jazz bass.
It is a jazz bass. Very comfortable instrument, huh?
Yeah, if you go to buy a new one now, you get a Geddy Lee model. It's probably pretty much the same thing.
Gotcha. Let's talk about what you were doing before the Swift Kick days. Let's talk about when you began.
Oh gosh, well, I was with George.
Say it again.
I was with George most of the time with Tattoo and Teaser.
Our old original projects of George CINTRON.
Yeah.
So is that like the first guy you ever played with, as far as like gigging out live?
Yeah,
Working with George?
in clubs, yeah. Well, we were in rival bands in high school, you know, and they lost their bass player, and my band broke up, and so it was a natural thing to get together, you know. so we did.
Okay. Like Battle of the Bands type
Yeah,
of things?
actually, it was a battle of the bands, right, in Brookwood Hall.
No kidding. And you guys remember those days?
Yeah, and my band won, by the way.
Yeah, you did. That's right.
Seriously, or is this what he
that's
said?
true.
See, he
No, that's
said
true.
you actually did your band. And what was the name of the band?
The name of the band was the Yellow Nelson Band.
The Yellow Nelson Band. I don't know if I want
You
to
guys
even
were
know.
you guys were Mammoth, right?
We were Mammoth.
Yeah. You were pissed off. I remember coming up the stage and you were standing there.
Fix was in.
George had the better name, but apparently you guys had the better players.
It was in Iceland.
I don't know.
All right. The good old days, huh?
Oh yeah.
So let's talk about when you first picked up a bass. What was the influence for you? What made you decide this was a direction you were going to head into in life? How old were you?
I must have been 10 years old when I first started playing guitar,
You started with the guitar.
and it was Elvis, the Elvis movies.
Okay.
Remember with the guitar and all the
Sure.
all the girls all over the place.
You wanted to be that guy.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And it became this, you know. I started playing guitar, and it just became bass. Bass was more natural for me, so I stuck with this.
Very nice, my man. Very nice. Let's talk about some other Swift Kick and the Furies we talked about. That old classic rock band from the early '80s. How long did Swift Kick last?
Swift Kick was around a couple of years before I joined. They did a lot of Joe Jackson and stuff like that. And then I joined. We turned it over.
We're talking, for those of you that aren't aware, like, again, musicians from this part of the world, back in the days when, like, Twisted Sister was getting started.
Yeah.
That's when Swift Kick began.
Yes. Matter of fact, Swift Kick opened a lot for Twisted Sister before I joined the group. And then actually we did. We did a lot of shows with Twisted Sister.
Okay.
And then I joined Swift Kick. And that lasted, if I was with them, I joined like 80 or 81, I think. And I guess I'm still in the band. We just don't play anymore.
Nobody told the band that that era's done, huh?
We played, how many years ago? We played a couple of years ago. We got together.
Swift Kick?
Yeah.
No kidding.
Out in the new Sundance out in Rocky Point.
Now, Swift Kick later became the Furies. Are we talking about
Yeah,
Swift
that
Kick?
we changed singers. We wanted to change. We wanted to change the feel of the band a little bit. We went from the Van Halen stuff and the Judas Priest stuff. We started playing some Motown and old rock and roll
You guys
stuff.
changed direction a little
We
bit.
had a different
yeah.
singer who had a whole different feel, and that was a lot of fun. It was just a lot of fun doing all the old Motown stuff.
Did the rest of the band agree with you on that?
Oh yeah, well it wasn't. It was a group choice, you know.
Okay, very cool, man.
We loved
Very
it.
Cool. Let's jump ahead to like the 90s. What were you doing in the 90s and
The 90s,
and 2000 era? Let's talk about those days.
Between 90, 91, and 2002, I didn't touch a guitar.
Why?
I retired.
A little hiatus. You took a little break.
Yeah, I retired, and it was good to have a break. You know, it was good to have a break. It was just too much. In 90 and 91, I was going to Manhattan a lot. I was playing with a group called Scarecrow, and we were trying to get a record, you know, the whole record deal thing, and it just burnt me out, and I just had enough.
All right.
And I stayed with my family, and you know, did the real life thing.
You did the family life thing.
Yeah, and
The 9 to 5 and the family.
Yeah.
All right.
And
Not the
then-
first guy to tell that story. You won't be the last. You won't be the last.
And I got dragged back in.
Just when you thought you were out,
I thought I was out. Yeah,
they
like a
pulled you
movie.
back in. You're holding down the bottom end, great, my man. Love what you're about. Looking at this instrument, I mean, it tells quite a story, man. And I appreciate you shedding some light on some of that past history
Oh, you're welcome.
with your beginnings to where you're at today. You definitely, like I said, holding down the bottom end, great. Look forward to seeing a lot more of you with George and some other things in the future. So
Right.
keep going strong, my man.
Yep, thank you.
Rick PANZIKA, bass and vocals. Let's head over to Steve Stewart for a minute, if we can, on the drum kit. How you doing, Steve?
I'm good. How are you? I want to clear one thing up about decades, by the way.
What do
Our
you got?
keyboardist, Bobby Simmons, has at least one decade over all three of us.
Is that right?
Okay, I just wanted to clear that up.
They turned your mic off at the right time, I see.
I can throw it, though.
Just wanted to clear that up.
I appreciate you straightening us out on that, Steve. Good story. Tell it again. Let's talk about your beginning, my man. Let's talk about when you first got behind the kit and did what that tremendous job you do today. How old were you when you began?
I was 14, and I owe it all to a
Ringo Starr.
friend of mine. His name was Michael Castaldo, and he lived down the block from me, and he used to play in his garage, and I used to listen, and I told my parents I wanted a drum, so they bought me a snare drum, and I played the snare drum for about a year, and then they bought me a set, and immediately took lessons. I took lessons with a great old guy, Jack Snyder, who's no longer with us.
That name sounds
Yeah,
familiar.
he used to pull up in a little red Volkswagen, and he taught me everything. Taught me everything.
I'm guessing he didn't bring a drum kit with him.
Nope, he brought a drum pad.
That makes sense.
Played the drum pad. I think for the first 2 years of my lessons was on a drum pad. He wouldn't even allow me to hit the drum.
Touch a kit.
Yeah. So he did it the right way.
Yeah, that's what I understand, man. That's what I understand.
And,
you were probably chomping at the bit to get behind the kit, though, weren't you?
Yeah, well, I had the kid. I was playing every day. I used to
Okay,
play to the records. My mother and father would put the records on upstairs, and I would play to them. Carole King and
No kidding.
all that stuff. Yeah.
No kidding.
And then I joined a band. I joined a band called Body Language, which was an 8-piece Santana band. It was the first band
Yeah, that
I
name
ever,
sounds familiar.
I ever played with. Then I hooked up with another guitarist, Jimmy Motto and Alex Santinelli, and we were the original Mammoth. Before I saw George play at a high school dance, saw him playing Hey Joe with his teeth, behind his head, in between his legs. The guitar was in another room. He was still playing it. And immediately fired my guitarist the next day.
Now, George is looking down at the ground like he's trying to remember that.
It's a true story.
You remember like it was yesterday.
I fired our guitarist the next day, and George had no choice. He was then in Mammoth, and then Ricky's band beat us in a battle of the bands.
That's how that whole thing came about, huh?
Yeah.
All right, all right. It happens. It happens. Boys, we got time for 2 more. I say we jump into another one. We'll do our goodbyes, and then you boys will play us out. What are we doing next, George CINTRON?
I think we're going to do Layla.
You good to go?
Yeah.
Let's do the tune. We'll come back to our goodbyes, and then you boys will play us out. Once again on the Long Island Blues Warehouse, we are going to keep it moving with this week's featured artist. It's the Clapton Chronicles.
What do you do when you get lonely?
situation. For finding coincidence. Please don't say we'll never find a way. Tell me all my love's in bed. Layla, got me on my knees. Layla, I beg you, darling, please. Layla, darling, won't you ease my worried mind? Layla,
yeah. Very nice, gentlemen. Very nice indeed. We want to thank on the bass, Mr. Rick PANZIKA. Rick, thank you so much. Appreciated the hell out of that. Back there on the drum kit, Mr. Steve Stewart. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Yo. Thanks for having us.
On the keys, Mr. Bobby Simmons. Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you.
Kick-ass as always. And last but certainly not least, guitar, vocals, Mr. George CINTRON. Nicely done, George.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you so much. Always enjoyed checking out the scene on Long Island. Another massive contributor to the Long Island scene in terms of live music. You and these three fellas behind you. Yes, for decades. And I look forward to seeing what the next few decades bring you boys. George, you boys are going to play us out. What are we finishing up with?
Let it rain.
We want to thank EKO Studios, the official studio, of course, of the Long Island Blues Warehouse. For further info, check them out at ekoproductions.com. For the Long Island Blues Warehouse, I'm Mark Klein at liblues.com. Gentlemen, one more time, we are going to say goodbye to the Clapton Chronicles.
Let your love